And how is UFE proactive against sexualized violence? Today we're welcoming Bryanna Anderson to discuss sexualized violence prevention. This is a really sensitive topic and something that's really important to us here at SUS and also to myself personally. So thanks for joining us today, Bryanna.
Thanks for having me.
Could you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and what your position is on campus?
Yeah, so I am the acting manager of student support, and I'm also responsible for the sexualized violence prevention program at UFE, which is called In This Together.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. So can we just start off with talking about what is sexualized violence?
Yeah, sexualized violence is really an umbrella term, which means it's a really general term to speak to a lot of different things. And so any unwanted act of sexual nature can be considered sexualized violence.
That's good to know. And what can someone do if they experience or witness sexualized violence?
So at UFE, we have the student support team who is able to respond to support needs students have if they've experienced sexualized violence or have, like you said, witnessed it and are just needing some support. So the student support team is able to kind of help students navigate the different options available to them, including a policy process if necessary. So letting the institution know, like, hey, this happened and I want something done about it. Or just to get support, which might be academic concessions or connecting to counseling or different things like that.
That's good. That's a lot of support out there. And is there a way to anonymously report sexualized violence?
Yeah, so that one's a little bit tricky. I think first it's important to know the difference between a report and a disclosure. And so a report is telling the institution that, hey, someone violated a policy that we have and I want you to take action about that. Usually in that process, everyone is kind of identified and named. The other option of disclosure is to let the institution or someone at the institution know that you have an experience of sexualized violence and just to seek support. Sometimes disclosures can lead to formal reports, and when that's the case, Student Support Center or student support coordinators can help students really understand what their options are and what a policy process would actually look like. So if you are in a position where you do want to anonymously report, I'd say, like, if you can, connect with a student support coordinator to really help you understand what your options are. Because, yeah, the anonymous part is often rare just because of the concept of procedural fairness. That is how we administer our policy process.
Okay. And what actions does UFE take against sexualized violence if that policy is violated?
Yeah, so if the policy is violated, then the university will respond. So students would have to submit a report, and then the institution has to respond. And if it's between two students, what can happen is the university will decide whether or not they're going to proceed with an investigation. So really similar to the bullying harassment one and how that's done through the Safe Student Learning Community policy, it's similar for the sexualized violence prevention policy. So the institution or the VP student's office is tasked with determining, hey, like, what happened and did it meet a standard of a policy violation? And if so, what's going to happen next? And so for the most part, this is an educational institution, and so the institution tries to be as educational in its response as possible. But there are, a list of sanctions that are part of the Safe Student Learning Community policy that might apply should a student be found in violation of that policy.
Okay.
But in terms of, like, what other actions are taken, I'd say, like, for the most part, we take an educational approach. And so we kind of lead with, well, how do we maybe prevent this by equipping our community with a good understanding of what consent and sexualized violence are and mean in practice.
That's good. And are there any support groups or maybe if you could go into depth about the other programs offered by UFE?
So for people experiencing violence? Or?
Yeah, for people experiencing sexualized violence, yeah.
Yeah, I will, probably partly because it's my area, but continue to return to the student support team. They are equipped with receiving disclosures and a trauma-informed practice to make sure people feel as safe as they might be able to in those kinds of settings. And again, to help them navigate all of the different options from policy process, including like, hey, this happened and I just like can't finish my studies anymore. We can look at what a withdrawal looks like, or an appeal for a late withdrawal. Maybe it's a grade appeal. So connecting with someone from the Student Support Center is probably going to be a good option to make sure that you're connected with all of the available supports available to you, both at UFE and sometimes in the community.
Okay. And how is UFE proactive against sexualized violence?
Proactive is a tricky question. It's a societal problem that exists, like whether or not UFE is doing something about it. So to get ahead of it is kind of hard because it's already here. But one of the things that we're doing to help create a supportive environment and a culture of consent is through education. We have workshops on consent, active bystander intervention, and how to receive a disclosure. So equipping our community with a fundamental understanding of what is sexualized violence, what is consent, and how do those actually work. Getting everyone on the same page and equipping them with the skills they need to support people who do share that that's happened to them creates an environment where sexualized violence is less tolerated. It's less likely. We all have a better understanding of what this looks like now. So that's one of the ways. Again, there is a policy. So Policy 236 is UFE's policy about the prevention, education, and response to sexualized violence. So, there are specific expectations regarding conduct at the university when it comes to sexualized violence.
And regarding those workshops, where could students find out more information about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a website called In This Together at ufe.ca, I believe. And not at ufe.ca, that's the email. If you wanted to get connected to set up a workshop, that would be the email that you could go to. There's also a web page In This Together through the UFE website. And you can send an email through there, and that's probably one of the better options. There's a little bit of information about receiving disclosures or kind of the model that we use for support. Connecting with the Student Support Center is usually a good way too. We can direct emails to like the appropriate people through there at studentsupport@ufe.ca.
Yeah, that's great. And what steps can I take to prevent sexualized violence?
Great question. I think one of the things that we can do is just get on the same page, again, about what sexualized violence is, what consent is. And I think our education system hasn't done a great job of talking to us about sex and consent. And so starting at the university level, like we're all starting a little bit behind. But taking the training that we have available, asking your profs to schedule a workshop for your class could be a great one. Become a student leader on campus. All of our student leaders, this would be part of the proactive measures as well, but all of our student leaders in like the student services area are equipped with sexualized violence prevention training. So both like consent information and receiving a disclosure so they can be in a position of support. I'd say that like being continuously like curious about the information that we're receiving and the messaging that it's providing. And, what are the things that we find funny that are really just sexualized violence disguised as a joke? And how do we as individuals start to change the norms and expectations within the circles that we're in about whether or not that's actually okay, right? And so like I think as an individual, it's like, okay, what is the basic understanding I need? Like, do I have a good understanding of what consent is? No, like, where do I get that information? If not, I mean, we're here for that. Same with receiving a disclosure. And so as important as it is to prevent sexualized violence, we actually don't have a lot of control over the actions of others. But what we do have control over is the way we respond to people when they share that they've experienced this. And if we're responding in a supportive, trauma-informed way, then we're starting to, like, again, change that culture a little bit so that people aren't as scared or worried to come forward because they can reasonably assume and expect that the person on the other side of that is going to be supportive and, help them get the information they need or the support that they need.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any advice for, say, a student who maybe their friend comes to them with a disclosure and they're maybe not equipped with that that training, do you have any advice for someone who might have a disclosure but isn't equipped with that?
Yeah, great question. First and foremost, listen. We often want to jump to respond and like, I'm so sorry, that's so terrible. Like just, sometimes we make it a little bit about us. The most important thing we can do is just be there. Hear that person's story, believe their experience, and then ask them like, what do you want to do next? One of the really important things to remember is that someone who has experienced this might have experienced trauma. And in order for us to respond in a supportive way, we want to make sure that their agency and autonomy is respected. And so asking what they want next, we can totally provide them options. Like, hey, I saw a counselor at UFE the other week. They were pretty great. Like, what would it be like for you if we walked over and made an appointment for you? So you can provide options and you can provide like that kind of support. But first and foremost, it's just listening, making sure that like we're not questioning their experience. We're just there to believe and letting them choose what happens next.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you, Bryanna, for taking the time to come in and talk to us about this important topic today. And once again, folks, thanks for tuning in to this important discussion on sexualized violence prevention. For more information on policy, feel free to check out our Know Your Rights webpage.